One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. From time to time, we will have what we call tough love episodes. That is what we're having today. Okay. We are talking about something. Oh, how do I put this? I'm trying to think of the best way to say it without it being too harsh, but to be really honest, some of y'all need to hear this. I don't want you outsourcing your podcast stuff before you understand how to do it. So we're going to talk about why outsourcing isn't always the best option and what you need to do instead first. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So I don't know if you do this, but oftentimes whenever I think about what I want to teach or what I want to talk about on the podcast, I ask myself, well, what's a relatable story that I can bring to the table that can either hit the point home harder or give you a real life relatable example? And today, as we talk about outsourcing things and what that can look like, when it's a good idea, when it's not a good idea, I thought, well, I really have to just share my experiences with working, period. So I got my first job when I was 15. I think I was technically 14. It was one of those like paid in cash, like under the table type things. My dad had done some work for the local lady who had a bridal shop. Y'all, dream job. I think I've talked about this before, but holy moly, I literally got to try on dresses, wedding dresses, which is so funny. Anytime I watch scenes in movies where people are like at really fancy bridal shops trying on dresses, I'm like, I've 100% did that when I was 14 and 15. I put on tiaras, I put on bodices, I put on all kinds of ridiculous things. And they had this mirror that was like, where you could step up. I don't know what that's called because I'm not a fancy person, but like, where you would step up and you look like you're a princess in a ball gown. Like that was my experience at 14 or 15. This was my first job. And I loved it so much. When prom season came around, I got to help all my friends buy prom dresses. I got to, I got my own prom dress for free. I got to pick it out and special order it. It was an amazing first job. But the thing is that this job kind of spoiled me for every other job that I would have later in life because it showed me what was possible whenever you try something yourself. And I'm so, so grateful to the boss that I had because I would ask her a question and it was almost like a parenting technique. She was like, I figure it out. Like, I don't have time to do it. Figure it out. And it never came across as like a rude thing. I never in my mind ever thought rude. I was just like, oh, she's busy. I need to just figure this out myself. And so that's really the mentality that I've had. Like, I get a box, like there'd be a shipment and she'd be busy with customers. And we lived in a really small town. So I knew that there weren't people coming in and out of the door all day. So if I came in the shop and she was with a customer, I knew instinctively, oh, she's trying to make a sale. I need to shut up, go in the corner and unload this box and figure out what I'm supposed to do with it. And if I don't do it right, then she can tell me. It's kind of like that idea of ask for forgiveness instead of permission. And maybe that's just my personality, but I remember, unpacking these boxes and doing these things. And she was like, how did you know I wanted you to do that? And I told her, I was like, I don't know. I just kind of got in there and got busy because I knew that you didn't want me to interrupt you. And I just assumed you wanted me to, unpack these things and then I wouldn't put them away. I would just, it's like inventory. If anybody's ever done retail, you've ever worked in a retail shop, you know that inventory is important and it's got to be done a certain way. So I didn't go and start messing things up. I just started taking things out of the box in a specific way. And long story short, I just got in there and did it. And I bring all that up because, oh my gosh, y'all, we could have a whole episode on my previous jobs that I've had in my life, from working in fast food where I'd go home every night smelling like ice cream and hamburgers and chicken strips, to working, the outlet store at Nike and folding clothes forever just to have some kids come in and just knock the whole thing off. If you ever worked in retail, you feel me, you totally understand. But I can also, after you work at a shoe store, if you've worked at a shoe store, you will totally understand what I'm talking about. You know how the shoe boxes have that little hole that's like a lip? Y'all, I could hold 10 or 12 boxes of shoes, Nike boxes, all together, get one size out, put them back. It's like a dance. I can still do it today. And it's so funny because my husband's like, why do you do that? When we go to Academy and we're picking out shoes for the kids, I'll have all these boxes. And I'm like, oh, look, I can still grab all of them at once. He's like, how do you? I'm like, well, when you work summers for a long time at Nike, it's just something that you learn. But I bring all of this up because I don't want you coming into your podcast and immediately looking around and saying, all this looks kind of hard. I'm just going to have somebody else do it. I don't think that that's the way to do it. And I know that this is my mentality. And so I'm telling you that that's what this is. It's not me saying this is the only way to podcast or this is the only way to create content, but I'm telling you, I approach things as putting in the sweat equity up front to figure things out will always pay off in the long run. And that doesn't mean that you should, flounder and not have anything figured out and then wake up in 6 months and say, oh my gosh, I wasted so much time. I could have had someone else helping me that does this so much faster. I think that it's really important, especially in the beginning, that you do some of the podcast things yourself and then eventually hire someone, not right at the beginning. There's a few exceptions to this, and I have some really great episodes that I want you to go check out. So the show notes for this episode are crystalprofit.com/episode 305. And I have 2 podcast episodes that we've talked about hiring and outsourcing and which specific people you could hire to help you with their podcast. So first of all, episode 67 is when should I hire a podcast editor? I had a conversation with a podcast editor and we talked about the ins and outs of what that can look like. But then also I did episode 117 where we talked about 7 people that you can hire to help you with your podcast. This is when I really break it down. And I know there's a lot of people in this audience in particular. I see y'all in our Facebook group and you're wanting to be podcast managers or podcast production teams, you want to run studios. Like there's so many different aspects of podcasting that are in this community. And I love it so much. I'm so happy that you're here. You're dedicated to your craft of getting better and learning how to serve your podcast host. So I applaud you so much for showing up and I'm happy that you're here in our community. But I think that people also need to understand that, and maybe this is something that y'all can do. If you're a podcast manager, if you're a production person, then I encourage you to help your host understand the mechanics of podcasting before you just take over everything from them. And the reason why I say that is not to put you out of a job and have people doing DIY stuff and doing everything themselves. It's because I think it's important for people to understand how all of the processes work so that they can get better at them. And I say that because if I hadn't have done so many things that I had done with my podcast, I would have never have known how to tell someone else to help me with it, right? So whenever I have asked people like project managers to come into my business and help me behind the scenes, set up my courses, make sure that my videos are done correctly, help me with uploading PDFs and doing a lot of the back end logistical pieces of it. If I hadn't have done that myself, I would not be able to tell them how to do it. Now, I do want to give you a disclaimer. I edit my own podcast. I edit my own videos. It's something I creatively really enjoy. So that doesn't get outsourced. I do all of that. But I wanted to give you an example of me hiring people in other places of my business to help me kind of streamline everything. But it wasn't something that I was brand new to. And there's a few reasons for that. One is I want to know how it works in case something breaks. I don't want to have to wait on someone. This is one of my biggest things. And it's one of the reasons why I've done my own website from the very beginning. I had heard a few horror stories. Like, unfortunately, there were several people that we all kind of started around 2014, 2015, and people hadn't really figured out a lot of the drag and drop builders on WordPress. If you don't have a WordPress site, simply that means that WordPress is open source, meaning you could create a whole custom website on top of it and like all these other things. But the drag and drop builders, what you know today, if you have like a Divi or an elegant theme, like if you have any of those, that is a drag and drop builder. And it is a lot easier today than it was back in the day, back in 2014, 2015 and beyond. It was definitely a lot more complex. And so people were charging tens of thousands of dollars to build these websites. And I had a good friend of mine who was an author. She was also launching books and writing books, and that's what she really wanted to do. And when she told me that she had this website, but she couldn't make changes to it, she realized there was an error on her site. And she was like, well, I can't get a hold of my guy who does my website, and I can't make this change. And I have my big launch coming up, and it's going to send people to the wrong place. And like my head was spinning for her because she was so flustered, so frustrated. And so I think about that as a new podcaster. If you were to just go into your studio, go into your office and record your podcast and then hand everything over, right? You hand over your recordings, you hand over the show notes, you hand over the marketing, you hand over everything after you do the recording. It makes me a little uncomfortable that what if one of those people called in sick? What if all of a sudden someone's kid had to stay home from school, so they're at home and they're like, oh, you know what? I can't finish doing these show notes. You're going to have to do them. Or someone else on the team is going to have to pick up that slack. You would be looking at them like a deer in headlights, like, what? I'm about to spend the next 17 hours of my life Googling, how do I do all these things? Whenever you could do it from the beginning. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be sloppy. But at least understanding the processes of how everything works will be so much more valuable from the get-go, even if you don't do it, right? I'm not saying you have to do this for months and months and months, but I do think you at least need to have the processes written down so that if something does break, if someone does go on maternity leave, if all of a sudden you and this contractor don't work out anymore and you're left high and dry with a podcast to manage, with a whole social media account that you're like, I don't even know what's been going on here. I just know that people DM me from time to time and say, hey, everything looks great. Awesome. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be in that situation. So while I think hiring at the right time can be super, super valuable to your business, I also don't buy into the idea that you have to hire people just because. And this is another thing that goes back to kind of how I was raised and the different things that I saw as my dad had his own business, right? He was a plumber. He had his own business for years and years. And I watched him as he hired people. And I would see that there would be times when he would struggle to make payroll and he would dip into his own funds, like our household funds, to pay people if a check was late on a job or if something wasn't working out just that way. And that always made me very weary of making sure, like, oh, I don't ever want to be in that situation. Like it stresses me out. It is like, oh, like the fear and anxiety of it is exhausting to think, oh my gosh, someone else's livelihood is dependent upon me. And I don't think that that's the kind of pressure that we should put on ourselves and our businesses as entrepreneurs. I think it's fantastic. If you can hire a whole slew of people, a whole team of people that can help you create awesome content and do amazing things with your podcast, I encourage it. I hope that you do that. But if you can't, if you cannot afford it, if your budget cannot afford it, don't feel like you have to go out and hire a whole bunch of people. And people will say, well, you can hire, a VA in a different country and it's a lot cheaper. Or you can do this on Fiverr, and just get someone really cheap off of there and they can do all these things for you. I think hiring at the right time is great, but I don't think that you should hire anybody in your business for your podcast until you know what you want and you know what you're doing. And this is another reason why I think outsourcing isn't always the best solution. You don't know if you're getting taken advantage of.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Y'all, my stomach hurt when I go to a conference and someone tells me how much they're paying a podcast manager. And okay, this is like not against podcast managers, but I want to be very, very clear that I value a podcast manager that is very upfront about what services they provide, how long they've been doing it, and for what podcast hosts they've been doing it for. Because there are some really freaking awesome podcast managers that I know. There's some people that are killing it in this industry that are behind the scenes of some very, very big podcast, and they're doing amazing things. And they have the right to charge what they charge. But whenever I see a brand new podcast manager coming out of the gate. They've never had their own podcast. They've never done this for anybody else, but they're just like, you know what? I'll just figure it out on the job. And they're charging these outrageous prices and they're not delivering. It's one thing to say you're going to charge something and then being able to deliver and figure things out on the fly. That's fantastic. It sounds like you're kind of skating on ice, but more power to you. But for those of you that are paying an arm and a leg and you're like, what am I actually paying for? What is that? Like, I feel like I'm still doing the majority of the work. Sorry to tell you, I feel like you're getting scammed. And I'm seeing it a lot more because the demand for podcast management and podcast production has just grown. And I think that you just got to be really careful. Always ask for references. This is something I always do. This was a lesson learned in 2020. I had a bad experience with a contractor and I learned. I didn't ask for references. I thought I knew that this person was going to be a great fit for the project that I was working on, and it turned out it wasn't. And I think that this is just an ever-growing process that we have to go through as we work with people, as we hire virtual assistants, project managers, team managers, like just anybody in general for your business. You got to know, what are they capable of? How is this going to work out? And sometimes you just have to do trial runs. But I'm getting off on like a tangent inside of a tangent, but let's go into 3 things that I really want you to consider. So before you decide to outsource, I would encourage you to learn the platform first. And what I mean by that is, number 1, you need to know how to use the platforms and go through the actual workflow. So this is what I was talking about earlier, like go do your podcast recording, walk through an editing, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the best edited job ever. And then I want you to upload it to Buzzsprout or whatever hosting site you're using. And then I want you to do the show notes, like go through all the steps. Even if they're crappy and you're like, I need somebody to come in and fix this later, that's totally fine. I just want you to go through the steps and write them down so you know what it is that you want. This is actually the second point. So you need to know how to use them, but you need to know what you want. Because you may have this idea, and I'm getting this a lot more lately, is like, I want a podcast just like Amy Porterfield's. I want a podcast where my show notes look like hers, and it has these transcripts and these beautiful sound bites and all this. And I'm like, I'm here to tell y'all, she has a team of people behind her. She does. She's got an awesome team of people. I've met some of them in person. I've met them virtually. They are freaking killing it behind the scenes. But if it is just you and you're like, I want to outsource to someone, you've got to know what you want. You have to be able to tell someone. This goes back to not getting taken advantage of, right? You have to be able to tell someone, okay, I'm going to hire you for these services. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Then I want you to jump up to B and then go through C, D, E, F, G, H. Like, you got to know what you're talking about, because I think that that's when they're preying on people that are podcast hosts that don't know what they're doing. And I just don't want that to be anybody in this community. I want to make sure that if you're outsourcing for the right reasons, but you actually know what you want people to do. And don't you sit there and say, oh, well, Crystal, I don't know what I would have them do. Yes, you do. Go back and listen to hundreds of episodes of this podcast where I tell you exactly what to do. I tell you how to create show notes. I tell you how to launch a podcast. I tell you how to upload things, market things on social media. Like, you don't have an excuse here. You have tons of outlines of information. If you're a profit podcasting student, you know what the processes are. You know what behind the scenes are. You could hire someone and give them your login to profit podcasting and say, here, go through this course. I'm going to go through it with you. And then we are going to do this together and be able to, be on the same page. That's like one of the biggest things is you want to be on the same page as your team member, as someone else that is walking in this journey of content creation with you. You just want to be on the same page. So you want to be able to say, this is what I want. And then the third thing, so we talked about, I want you to learn the platform, right? You need to know how everything works in the workflow. You'll be able to know what you want. That's number 2. And number 3, you're going to know where you can save time and save money. This is a really big deal for me because I do not like spending money where I don't need to. That's like plain and simple. And when it comes to outsourcing things, I think what I realized is I don't need to hire someone part-time at this moment for everything that I'm doing. Don't get me wrong, I would love to, but at the same time, I look at all the processes that I'm doing and what I want to focus on. And y'all, I love doing the content creation. I love recording the podcast. I love editing and doing the videos and doing the planning. Like creatively, it comes to me better because I'm in it. I'm in the thick with you. And it blows my mind. And this is me like I said earlier, it's a tantrum inside a rant, inside a tough love podcast. Like it's all the things today. I'm just letting it all out on the table here, but it drives me bonkers when I meet podcast coaches that don't have a podcast. They've never been a podcaster. They don't really know anything about it. And I'm just like, it just blows my mind. I'm like, how can you teach this and do these things if you've never done it yourself? It's a red flag for me. So when I go to conferences and I am part of these virtual events and someone's like, oh yeah, I'm a so-and-so podcast manager. And I'm like, oh, awesome. What's your podcast? Oh, I don't have one. I've never had a podcast. And I just think, wow, okay, that's okay. That's fantastic. It makes me immediately not trust them as much because they're not relatable to me as a podcaster. Right? So like, even if they were to give me advice, I'd like kind of have this idea in my head, like, do they really know what they're talking about though? Because they're not doing all the things. And so that's one of the reasons why I do all the things. One, because I enjoy it, but two, the content creation comes so much more natural to me whenever I'm doing it. I'm recording the podcast episodes. I'm editing the podcast episodes. I'm uploading them. I'm creating the show notes. And yeah, I know there will come a time when I do start outsourcing things to maybe a whole team of people. But for now, it's really helps me understand what I want. And when I hire someone that is full-time or part-time, and I hand off a specific piece of the content to them, I'm going to be able to tell them, look, here is our process. Here is what I'm expecting as an employee or as a contractor. These are the deliverables that we need to see each week or every other day or whatever that workflow process looks like. But I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that from the get-go. So I'm not saying outsourcing is terrible and that it's not something that you should ever do, but I think that you should evaluate, where can I save some time for myself? Where can I save money? And money plays into the factor in there's a lot of contractors out there that are totally worth their money. And that is why a lot of them, I have had to let them go. And it's not that they're charging too much. I want them to charge what you're worth, please. I just can't afford that anymore. And it was a really hard, humbling experience to have to let go of a project manager that I could no longer afford. But it was also really fulfilling for me because I told her, I was like, I'm so proud of you, but I can't pay your rates anymore. This is nothing against you. I'm actually applauding that you are growing into the next phase of your business and what you're branching off to do. But for me, that money could be spent elsewhere in my business right now. And so what I've done in outsourcing is not necessarily to people, but it's to automation processes. I use Zapier, however you say it, right? Like it's the jury's out. I have no idea how you say Zapier, but I just kind of go back and forth between the two. But I spend a lot of money in softwares and in different types of automations that I can use in my business because that's the piece that makes my life easier. I started using Adobe Audition instead of just Camtasia to make my video editing better because I can't hire a video editor. And somebody would say, yeah, you can. It's only so much. Not when I have the vision that I do for my content. But because you see, the content for me plays such a big role. It's not just about connecting and showing up every single week. It's the bigger vision of what I have for my business, and hiring someone to outsource my editing would just slow me down because I'm doing 3 videos a week for my YouTube channel. I'm doing 2 podcast episodes a week for my podcast. Y'all, this would cost me thousands and thousands of dollars every single month that I don't want to spend on that stuff. So going back to the sweat equity that I talked about earlier, that is what is important to me. I know there's going to come a day where I say, okay, I just don't have time for it anymore. I can't do it. But for now, in the season that I'm in with my business, I really do enjoy it. I enjoy doing the things that I have in my business. So I encourage you to look at, if there's something you don't enjoy in your business, how can you outsource that? And what could that look like? But before you do that, make sure you know the systems, you know the processes, and you know what you want. I think that is really the biggest takeaway, is understanding what you want and not just blindly saying, oh, sure, I'll go record my podcast. And then you just send someone a check every month and you're really disconnected from all the processes. Because what if that company goes away? What if they fold overnight? They go out of business. They can no longer do your services. And then you're left in the dark with like, I don't even know how to do anything with my podcast. I don't know how any of this works. I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to upload. I don't even know how to get in. I'm locked out of my Buzzsprout account because I don't even know how to get in there. I don't want this happening to anybody in this community. So if you have any other questions, or actually even better, if you listen to this podcast and you're a member of our Facebook community, I would love for you to go into the Facebook group, say, I listened to this episode of the podcast, like make sure you put the episode number or the episode title in there and say, this is what I do in the podcasting industry. Don't put any links to anything because we don't do self-promotion except for on our Plug Your Podcast on Wednesdays. But I want you to tell people, this is what I do in the podcasting industry, and this is how I help podcasters, because maybe somebody is looking for exactly what you do. Or if you've been thinking about hiring someone in the podcasting space and you're like, this is exactly what I need, post that in the group. If you're not sure and maybe you want to start a conversation and say, hey, I need to outsource, but I don't really know where. I just know I don't like doing this thing or whatever. Like, let's start the conversation around hiring people, what it looks like to work with the podcast launch manager. Like, go listen to episode 117 where I talk about the different people, because there's 7 different people that I think are really important. If you're thinking about hiring to have someone help you with your podcast, please go listen to that episode, because it has a podcast launch manager, an editor, a podcast producer, like all the things that I think would be really helpful for you to consider as you look at outsourcing. Like I said, it's not always the first option. I would love it if you would put some sweat equity into your podcast before you start handing those off to someone else. Whew. Okay, so like I said, it was a little bit of tough love, a little bit of rant, a little bit of like all over the place. Like it's a messy ball of love. Okay, that's really all this is. This episode is wrapped up in a messy ball of love. I hope you feel it. I hope that you know I'm rooting for you, and I cannot wait to see what you create, either by yourself or with your team. I am here to cheer you and your podcast on. But that's all I have for you today. So go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 305 to check out all the things we talked about today. If you are brand new around here and you are not already following the podcast, please subscribe, follow wherever you are listening so you don't miss our future videos that we put out every single Tuesday and Thursday. You find a brand new episode of this show, and I'm so grateful that you're here listening to it today. But as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal, it could be totally anonymous, or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.